A 2011 study from the University of Michigan found that rejection activates the same parts of the brain as physical pain. This explains why we avoid it so much. But almost no one talks about how rejection isn't just an obstacle, it's a tool. And if you understand how it works, it can be your ally in developing emotional resilience, independence, and authenticity. Have you ever felt that tightness in your chest after being ignored by someone important? Or the empty feeling when a no shatters a hope that seemed solid? It's not an exaggeration. According to a University of Michigan study, rejection activates the same areas of the brain as physical pain. In other words, being rejected is like being hit from the inside. Now imagine a simple situation. You send a message, you see that it was read, but there is no response. Silence turns into doubt, into anxiety, and sometimes into shame. It is not the fact of being ignored that hurts, but what it triggers inside you. This reaction is not accidental. Our brains have been shaped over millennia to link acceptance with survival instincts. In ancient tribes, being excluded from the group meant mortal danger. Today, the threat is no longer physical, but the nervous system still reacts as if everything is the same. The interesting thing is that most often, rejection does not speak about the other person. It points inward, to old wounds, insecurities, and beliefs that you are not even aware of. This is why a simple situation can cause an emotional storm. And this is where the real change begins. Understanding what rejection is evoking is the first step, but the real transformation begins when you recognize what that pain is trying to show you. Rejection is a mirror. And as unpleasant as it may be to look at it, it doesn't reflect another person. It reflects you. The reason it hurts so much isn't just because you've lost something, it's because it activates a certain way of seeing yourself. Imagine a typical situation. You apply for a vacancy, go through 2 stages, receive praise, but in the end you are rejected. The company says that it has chosen a different profile. And that's it. But in your head, this rejection grows. You start thinking that maybe you're not good enough, that you did something wrong, that you should have been more sociable or, on the contrary, more tech-savvy. External rejection awakens an internal one that has been inside you for a long time, just waiting for the right moment. This is where an important concept comes into play: personal meaning. A study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people who perceive rejection as a criticism of their personality experience more pain and have a harder time recovering. So it's not the rejection itself that breaks you, it's what you think it says about you. This happens because we carry around unresolved hang-ups. Sometimes it's an old idea that we're not interesting enough, or a quiet conviction that will be dumped sooner or later anyway. When an external event seems to confirm this belief, the pain becomes greater. But there is one key thing in this process. Every time a rejection cuts deep, it indicates that there is something inside you that is still unprocessed. Not as guilt, but as a map, a clear sign of where the wound is. Now that you understand that rejection reflects something that is still unresolved in you, it's time to talk about one of the most powerful saboteurs of self-esteem: approval addiction. From childhood, we learn that acceptance from others gives us a sense of security. A compliment, a high mark, an approving smile, all of this seems to confirm that we are on the right track. The problem begins when this need turns into an automatic and unnoticeable habit. You start making decisions based on the expectations of others. You change your clothes to please, choose a profession under pressure, remain silent to avoid conflict. Authenticity is gradually lost. A simple example. Imagine a person in a relationship who stops talking about his feelings so as not to seem too difficult. He begins to give in, to adapt, until he realizes that he is in a situation that does not correspond to his true nature. And the cruelest thing is that often, despite all efforts to please, he is still rejected. This is because seeking approval at any cost destroys personal identity. And the other person feels it, even if they can't explain it. Science confirms this effect. A University of Houston study found that people who avoid conflict and constantly seek approval are more likely to suffer from symptoms of anxiety and depression. That is, the desire to be liked has a high emotional cost. The good news is that there is a way out of this cycle. But the first step is to notice the pattern itself. When you become aware of how many decisions you make to fit in, rather than because you really want to, you are freed to act more authentically. Imagine walking into a room full of important people. Two people immediately attract attention. One speaks loudly, tries to please everyone, smiles too often. The second is silent, calm, self-confident. And this second person somehow makes a stronger impression. You can't explain exactly why, but he exudes strength. This is emotional self-sufficiency. It's not about being cold or distant. It's about not needing anyone's approval to feel valuable. Emotionally self-sufficient people make decisions based on their own values, not on the expectations of others. They don't adjust. They occupy their space in their own way. A practical example. You are in a work group and you have an idea that differs from the majority. Someone who seeks approval will most likely remain silent or soften their position. But a person with emotional self-sufficiency will express their point of view clearly, even if they know it will cause resistance. This doesn't mean being stubborn. It means knowing what you think and not needing applause to confirm it. This behavior directly affects how you are perceived. A Harvard Business School study found that confident people, even if they say little, are perceived as more competent and trustworthy. It's not about being the center of attention, it's about not needing it. When you become emotionally self-sufficient, something changes in your energy field, so to speak. You radiate stability, and that's attractive. People are naturally drawn to those who aren't trying to prove anything. But that kind of presence is only possible when you stop hiding parts of yourself. When you no longer run away from what you still haven't worked through. Emotional self-sufficiency is not built on motivational phrases. It is born when you come face to face with what you have been trying to run away from for a long time, with your own shadow. The shadow is a concept coined by Carl Jung. It describes everything you repress or deny about yourself. Fears, impulses, character traits that you have learned to hide in order to be accepted. The problem is that the more you hide it, the more it controls you, outside of your awareness. Imagine a person who was taught from childhood not to express anger. It was as if this feeling was locked in a box, as if it did not exist. But as an adult, this person may suddenly lose their temper or feel paralyzed in conflict situations. The problem isn't the anger itself, but that they never learned how to manage it. A study published by the American Psychological Association found that suppressing emotions is associated with increased anxiety, physical symptoms, and even decreased decision-making ability. In other words, what you avoid can sabotage your relationships, career, and self-esteem, even if it seems invisible. Facing your shadows means admitting that you, too, feel jealousy, insecurity, self-love, and fear of rejection. And that doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. True power comes when you stop fighting these parts and begin to integrate them. This does not mean indulging in impulse, but acknowledging their existence and learning to deal with them consciously. The one who integrates his shadow becomes whole. And this integrity directly affects relationships. You become more consistent, stable, authentic. People feel it, even if you don't say anything. And when you become whole inside, your behavior changes on the outside, including in situations of rejection. There is a quiet irony in human relationships. The more you chase someone, the more they distance themselves. And it's not just a feeling, it's a basic feature of human behavior. The brain reacts negatively to the feeling of lack. When someone shows excessive need for attention, approval, or affection, the other party perceives it as pressure. Even if the intentions are good, the unconscious message sounds like a signal of imbalance. An imbalance is repulsive. Think of a simple example. Imagine someone starting a relationship with someone new and in the first few days constantly texting, demanding a response, looking for constant signs of interest. The other party, who may have been interested initially, begins to feel stifled. Not out of malice, but because the excess of expectations is perceived as a burden. And no one wants to carry someone else's emotional burden. There's a study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology that confirms this. People with high levels of emotional dependency are perceived as less attractive and less reliable. Why? Too much uncertainty signals instability, and the human brain instinctively seeks connections with those who project reliability. This isn't about playing games or appearing indifferent. It's about balance. When you reach out to something or someone with confidence but without need, you communicate autonomy. And it's felt not through words, but through what you radiate. Good news. This can be learned. It all starts with changing your focus. Instead of trying to win someone over, you learn to remain whole, with or without an answer. This change not only reduces anxiety, but also makes your connections more natural and respectful. And here we come to the key point: genuine non-attachment. Because stopping the chase does not mean closing yourself off from the world. It means opening up to healthier relationships. When people talk about non-attachment, many people misunderstand it. They think it means being cold, distant, indifferent. But true non-attachment has nothing to do with indifference. It has everything to do with emotional maturity. Non-attachment is when you choose to be with someone, but you don't need that person to feel complete. When you value an opportunity but don't despair if it doesn't happen. It's an internal position that conveys balance. Give a practical example. Two people walk into the same interview. One is nervous, eager to please, saying what he thinks people want to hear. The other is calm, confident, clearly states his strengths and honestly acknowledges his limitations. Even without knowing the outcome, the second is already in a winning position. Not because he is more qualified, but because he exudes confidence, a quality that is increasingly valued in the market. Such behavior is a reflection of a person who has learned to rely on himself from within. And this applies to all areas of life. In relationships, the one who practices such non-attachment knows how to speak firmly, set boundaries, and at the same time open up sincerely. Without games, without panic fear of losing the other. There is simply presence. According to a study from the University of Toronto, people with high emotional autonomy show higher levels of well-being in interpersonal relationships. This proves that genuine detachment does not alienate. It strengthens connections because it allows them to be built without dependence and manipulation. This type of connection is only possible when you have learned to live well in your own company. And that is when the type of presence that attracts without effort is born. Authenticity that doesn't need to prove itself. Authenticity has one curious property. It attracts. And not because it is perfect, but because it is rare. In a world where almost everyone is trying to fit in, those who stay true to themselves naturally stand out. Authenticity is saying what you think with respect, acting in accordance with your values, and not trying to be someone you are not. This doesn't mean telling everything all the time or acting without a filter. It means being whole. What you think, feel, and do is aligned. This creates trust. And trust attracts. A simple example. Think of someone you admire. It could be a public figure, a colleague, or a friend. Think about it. This person probably has something in common with others you respect. They are themselves. They don't pretend, they don't try to be nice, they don't try to please everyone. And that's why people listen when he speaks. A Harvard University study found that authentic leaders are more influential and create a more engaging environment. Because authenticity evokes deeper attention. People sense when there is truth behind the words. In practice, this changes everything. A specialist who clearly expresses his position, even if his opinion is not the most popular, evokes a feeling of reliability. A person who shows vulnerability without belittling themselves creates the conditions for real contact. Someone who remains themselves, even at the risk of being misunderstood, radiates courage. But it is important to remember that being authentic requires self-knowledge. And self-knowledge requires courage. Because you need to know who you are in order to be able to defend it to others. There is a special kind of rejection that hurts more than any external criticism. It's when you betray yourself in order to be accepted. When you ignore your values, silence your opinions, or hide parts of your personality just to avoid disappointing others. This rejection doesn't come from the outside. It is born inside. And it is the quietest, because often you do not even notice that you are doing it. Imagine a person who agrees to go to an event only because he is afraid of seeming unsociable, although he is exhausted. Or someone who enters into a relationship just to avoid being alone, even though they feel unappreciated. These small acts of self-betrayal, repeated over time, create a constant discomfort. A feeling of emptiness that is hard to explain, but always there. A study published in the Journal of Counseling Psychology found that the greater the gap between who a person is and the social role they play, the higher the risk of developing symptoms such as anxiety, apathy, and low self-esteem. That is, the more you live to be liked, the further you move away from yourself. And here is the paradox. The harder you try to avoid rejection from others, the more you reject yourself. And when that happens, any external no hurts doubly because it hits an already open wound. Breaking this cycle begins with one decision: to stop trying to fit into patterns that don't fit you. It does take courage. But it's also liberating. You start to move toward more genuine relationships, more fulfilling opportunities, choices that actually make sense. Living by your own standards isn't just an act of freedom, it's a turning point. When you stop seeking approval and start acting on what you truly believe, everything around you begins to change. This doesn't mean ignoring feedback or isolating yourself from the world. This means that your decisions begin to reflect who you are, rather than who others want you to be. It's a subtle but profound change. Imagine someone who always had a talent for art, but chose a traditional career to please their family. Years have passed and he lives with a feeling of dissatisfaction, as if something is missing. And then, finally, he decides to do what he loves, even without guarantees. Something inside him comes into harmony. The problems don't go away, but he now has clarity, motivation, and energy that he didn't have before. That's living by your own standards. That choice directly affects your self-confidence. A study from the University of Essex in the UK found that people whose actions are consistent with their inner values report significantly higher levels of well-being and self-esteem. When you live consistently, your energy changes, and those around you feel it, even if they can't explain it. You begin to attract more genuine connections, more fulfilling opportunities, and more balanced relationships. That's because your presence is no longer an attempt to please. It's an authentic expression of who you are. And that's where the real change happens. When you realize that you don't need anyone's validation to be whole, rejection loses its power. It stops being an end and becomes just a natural part of the journey. A filter. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe to our channel, Flow of Thoughts, and turn on notifications so you don't miss new helpful videos.